He also said that he had read the package insert about the drug which comes with each vial. And we had already established that the package insert is not the ultimate criterion of use. The last thing that he had found in his file and reviewed was the position paper of the Medical Society of New York, which was prepared by a bunch of people who didn't know any more about it than he did. Well, I must confess I was climbing the walls, and my own attorney asked me to leave the room. But I made very sure that the panel understood the obscenity that they had just witnessed of a fine cardiologist stooping so low that he was willing to testify under oath that chelation was worthless without knowing anything about it, and not even having the intellectual curiosity to find out what our experts had testified to about it. That was basically the end of the hearing, except for the summation, and the panel then retired to come up with its recommendation. It took them over 10 months of deliberation, and they produced a 127-page document which ended up with the recommendation that the state of New York revoke my license to practice medicine. They justified that decision by finding that Victor Herbert, although clearly biased and inflammatory, was nevertheless an authoritative witness. This, mind you, in spite of the fact that he didn't know what the essential fatty acids are for humans. He claimed that RNA broke down into constituent amino acids, which it doesn't have any of. He claimed that folate deficiency doesn't cause brain damage when it has been reported in the literature very clearly. I mean, it's inconceivable that any objective listener could give one iota of credence to the testimony of a man who lied and screamed and cursed and flouted the judge's orders. But that's what they did. And Linus Pauling wasn't germane. Can you believe that? But as they say, you ain't heard nothing yet. Their final ruthless attempt at a power play culminated the 13-year vendetta. All along, the pretense has been that the hearing panel was an objective body, ready to listen to both sides, weigh the evidence fairly, and render an honest scientific verdict. Well, having heard Dr. Michael Victor Herman admit under oath that he had no knowledge of chelation therapy other than someone else's opinion, they not only considered his testimony anyway, but they went out of their way to label him a credible and authoritative expert. Thus, the kangaroo court justified its kangaroo decision, and they expect to be able to get away with it, just the same way that Dr. Kessler expected to be able to get away with an armed raid on Jonathan Wright, and to get away with keeping tryptophan off the shelves even though the problem was a contaminated batch, having nothing to do with tryptophan. The list of unconscionable and unjustifiable repressions grows almost daily at all levels of government. If we do not take advantage of this moment, when the great American public is already up in arms about the obscenity of medical care run by the pharmaceutical, medical, surgical, industrial, health insurance complex, if we do not demand in large numbers the right to have the nutritional alternative, the complementary approach, the holistic way, before the end of 1993, they will pass us by, and Kessler and Herbert will have the last laugh. But we've got them, guys. It is on the record. That record is coming before an extraordinary and unique body, the Board of Regents of the State of New York. It appears as though I am going to be the last physician heard by the Board of Regents, because in the fall of 1991, the legislature was boondoggled and bamboozled by the health industry into passing a law, and that law says the Board of Regents no longer has a role to play in determining a physician's license. The reason for that is that the Regents had overturned almost 40% of the recommended revocations by the Department of Health. And the Department of Health was getting frustrated because they were not able to complete their agenda of totally controlling the practice of medicine. You know, just as the police don't want a civilian review board, the doctors don't want a bunch of civilians reviewing their administrative positions. But we still have this opportunity because my case began under the old law. It is very interesting that the courts in the United States carry a burden, like so many things, yin and yang, a two-way street, a double-edged sword. It is the burden of observing precedents. The precedent in this country is that the courts keep their hands off the administrative processes, saying basically, look, we've set up these administrative jurisdictions to handle administrative problems. The courts are here to take care of civil and criminal offenses. Therefore, it is exceedingly difficult to overturn administrative decisions in the courts. But the Board of Regents is the opportunity for final appeal in administrative dispositions in New York State, and they are not beholden to anyone except the public. They are there to protect the public. The Department of Health and the OPMC say that the public has to be protected from guys like me and from the health food industry. They say that the medical consumer is ignorant and taken in by the fraudulent notions of complementary medicine. But if the great American public speaks loudly, they can drown out such nonsense. They did it in the Senate to the tune of over 94-1 in overturning the recommendations. That was directly the result of an avalanche of letters and phone calls, and the politicians responded. You remember the old saying, politicians don't see the light, they feel the heat. Well, the Board of Regents is not an elected body, but they are above reproach. They will be responsive to the will of the people if it is adequately made known. And that's why I'm calling upon you, because each of you has his or her own constituency. The people who come into your store believe in this kind of medicine. They are sent there by doctors like us, as well as by other practitioners who utilize nutrition, and by word of mouth. But having MDs for you to refer to is almost as important as having the referrals from us to you. So this is your case, too, and it's coming up fast all of a sudden. Because now the new Commissioner of Health, Mark Chasson, MD, has just rubber-stamped the committee's recommendation. And we are officially at the last step, waiting for our appeal before the Board of Regents. I need two things to make this victory complete. Number one, I need enough letters and postcards to overwhelm the opposition. And if each of you listening can get only 100 of your customers to sign and send a letter such as the one enclosed, we will indeed overwhelm them with the might of our numbers. I'd like each of you to be responsible for more than that with networking. Number two, all that would do would be allow me to keep my license. Believe me, I want that very much. But all along it has been my position that this is a test case. They're not just after Warren Levin. They are after complementary medicine, and all of my fellow practitioners are going to be targeted once they have this precedent-setting decision. And the only way to stop that is to change the law. And in order to do that, we have to have money to fund a publicity campaign so that this victory doesn't get lost in the back pages of the newspapers, combined with Jonathan Wright and tryptophan, and dozen other flagrant abuses of the rights of physicians and health food store owners and vitamin manufacturers and clinical ecologists and homeopaths. The list goes on and on. There are very few able to sustain the financial expense of the prolonged harassment by the state bureaucracy. Indeed, the only reason that I've survived the ordeal was that I was able to get financial contributions to help me in my defense. Now is the time for an offensive. We can get this message out. They have gone too far. The idea that Victor Herbert and Michael Victor Herman can be considered credible in the face of the sworn testimony is more than Americans are willing to swallow. I do not think that we can expect to be given a similar opportunity to expose and discredit and restrain once and for all this system that is driving American medicine away from healing, away from awe and wonder and reverence for all the divine and miraculous healing power of nature that renders man's technology puny by comparison. Think of it. The hearing panel sustained the charge against me that I was fraudulent and therefore unworthy to practice medicine in the state of New York because I administered a vitamin. To quote the prosecutor, I don't care if it's injected or oral or rubbed onto the skin, it's irrelevant. And that amended charge was sustained by the panel as cause of revocation of my license.